Commander Marcus Wellington stepped out of his black sedan at Buckingham Palace, adjusting his crisp navy uniform with practiced precision. The morning London fog hung thick in the air, but nothing could dampen his mood today. After 15 years of distinguished service, he was finally being recognized with a special commendation from the Royal Navy for his exceptional leadership during the Mediterranean crisis 6 months earlier. The 42-year-old officer had always carried himself with an air of superiority that bordered on arrogance. His fellow officers often whispered about his condescending attitude, but his impressive service record and influential connections had always protected him from any serious consequences. Marcus believed that his rank and achievements placed him above most people, especially those he considered beneath his station. As he approached the palace gates, Marcus noticed the royal guards standing at attention in their iconic red tunics and tall bearskin hats. These guards had always seemed like mere decorations to him, ceremonial figures with no real purpose beyond entertaining tourists. He had often joked with his colleagues about how these guards were nothing more than glorified statues, standing motionless for hours while real military personnel like himself did the actual work of protecting the nation. The guard at the main entrance was a young man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. His nameplate read, Guardsman James Mitchell. And despite his youth, he maintained perfect posture and alertness. Marcus approached him with a smirk, already formulating a plan to have some fun at the guard's expense. "Good morning, toy soldier," Marcus said with a mocking tone, deliberately using a term he knew would be insulting. "I'm here for the ceremony. I suppose you'll need to check your little book to see if someone as important as myself is expected." Guardsman Mitchell remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead, as protocol demanded. He had been trained to ignore provocations and maintain his composure regardless of the circumstances. However, Marcus interpreted this silence as either stupidity or disrespect, both of which irritated him further. "I said good morning," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "Don't they teach you people basic manners? Or are you too busy playing dress-up to learn proper respect for superior officers?" A small crowd of tourists had begun to gather, their phones already out, and recording what they assumed would be an amusing interaction with the famously stoic royal guards. Marcus noticed the attention and decided to escalate his performance, thriving on what he perceived as an audience for his superiority. "Perhaps you didn't hear me correctly," Marcus said, stepping closer to the guard. "I am Commander Marcus Wellington of Her Majesty's Royal Navy, and I demand the respect that my rank deserves. When a superior officer addresses you, you respond appropriately." The guard's training was extensive and thorough. He had been prepared for various forms of harassment, from drunk tourists trying to make him laugh, to aggressive individuals attempting to provoke a reaction. Maintaining discipline in the face of such behavior was considered one of the most important aspects of his duty. James continued to stare straight ahead, his breathing controlled and his posture unchanged. Marcus felt his anger rising at what he perceived as deliberate insubordination. In his mind, this young guardsman was publicly disrespecting him, and such behavior could not be tolerated. He failed to recognize that the guard was simply following his orders and maintaining the discipline expected of his position. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Marcus declared, his voice echoing off the palace walls. "I've served this country with distinction for 15 years. And I will not be ignored by some ceremonial puppet who probably couldn't pass basic military training." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with more phones capturing every word and gesture. Social media notifications were already beginning to ping as videos of the confrontation started spreading across various platforms. Some tourists looked uncomfortable with the increasingly aggressive tone, while others seemed entertained by the drama unfolding before them. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his military identification, waving it dramatically in front of the guard's face. "Do you see this?" he shouted. "This represents real service, real sacrifice, real contribution to this nation's security. You stand here like a museum exhibit, while people like me actually defend our country." Guardsman Mitchell's training included detailed instruction on dealing with verbal abuse. He understood that his role was not just about protecting the palace physically, but also about maintaining the dignity and reputation of the institution he served. Every guard was aware that their behavior could reflect on the entire royal family and the traditions they represented. Marcus began pacing back and forth in front of the guard, his agitation becoming more apparent with each step. "I've commanded ships, led men into dangerous situations, made decisions that affected the lives of hundreds of people. And you stand here like a toy soldier, contributing nothing of value to anyone." The irony of the situation was completely lost on Marcus. While he criticized the guard for standing motionless, he failed to appreciate the immense discipline and mental fortitude required to maintain such composure under pressure. The royal guards underwent rigorous training that tested not only their physical capabilities but also their psychological resilience. "I suppose this is what passes for military service these days." Marcus continued his tirade. "Pretty uniforms and silly hats, instead of real commitment and actual duty. No wonder people don't take the military seriously anymore when this is what represents us." A palace security official had noticed the commotion and was quietly observing from a distance, speaking into a discreet radio device. The incident was being monitored and recorded through multiple security cameras, and appropriate personnel were being notified of the situation. However, Marcus was too focused on his own performance to notice these developments. The commander's voice grew even louder as his frustration mounted. "I demand to speak with your supervisor immediately. This kind of disrespect toward a senior officer is completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated. I'll make sure this incident is reported through proper channels." Guardsman Mitchell knew that help was on the way, but he also understood that his duty required him to maintain his position and composure regardless of the circumstances. His training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, and he drew on that preparation to remain focused on his responsibilities. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Marcus demanded, moving even closer to the guard. "The least you can do is show some acknowledgement of my presence and my rank. This is a complete disgrace to everything the military is supposed to represent." The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, with tourists from various countries witnessing the spectacle. Many seemed shocked by Marcus's behavior, having expected to see the traditional ceremony and pageantry associated with the palace, not an aggressive confrontation between military personnel. Marcus's anger had now completely overtaken his judgment. He failed to consider how his behavior might be perceived by others, or what consequences might result from his actions. In his mind, he was simply demanding the respect he deserved, and any negative outcomes would be the fault of the insubordinate guard who had provoked him. "This is exactly what's wrong with the modern military," he declared to the crowd, as if they were an audience gathered specifically to hear his opinions. "Real officers who've proven themselves in actual service are disrespected by ceremonial figureheads who've never faced real danger or made real sacrifices." The security official continued to observe and coordinate, ensuring that the situation remained under control while allowing it to play out naturally. There was a careful balance between maintaining safety and avoiding any actions that might escalate the confrontation unnecessarily. Marcus pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of the guard, claiming he needed evidence of the disrespectful behavior for his formal complaint. "I'm documenting this entire incident," he announced loudly. "This guardsman's conduct will be thoroughly investigated, and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken." The tourists continued recording, creating a comprehensive digital record of Marcus's behavior from multiple angles. These recordings would soon become crucial evidence, though not in the way Marcus anticipated. His assumption that he was documenting the guard's misconduct would prove to be dramatically mistaken. As Marcus continued his verbal assault, he remained completely unaware that his own actions were being carefully documented and evaluated by people far more important than the tourists with their phones. The wheels of consequence were already in motion, driven by protocols and procedures that existed far beyond his understanding or influence. The commander's final mistake was assuming that his rank and connections would protect him from any negative consequences of his behavior. He had spent years believing that his position placed him above accountability, and this confidence had led him to act without considering the potential ramifications of his actions. As the confrontation continued to unfold, Guardsman Mitchell maintained his composure and discipline, unknowingly demonstrating the very qualities that Marcus claimed to value, but had failed to display himself. The contrast between the two men's behavior was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone present. setting the stage for events that would soon transform both of their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Pemberton emerged from the palace's east wing, her stride purposeful and measured as she approached the growing commotion at the main gate. As the deputy commander of the Queen's Guard, she had been monitoring the situation through security feeds and radio reports for the past several minutes. What she witnessed on the screens had prompted her immediate personal intervention. Sarah was not someone to be underestimated. At 38, she had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, earning commendations for valor under fire and strategic excellence in combat operations. Her transition to palace security had been a prestigious appointment, recognizing both her military accomplishments and her unimpeachable character. Unlike Marcus, she had earned her position through merit rather than connections, and her reputation was built on substance rather than self-promotion. As she drew closer, Sarah could hear Marcus's voice carrying across the courtyard, his tone becoming increasingly aggressive and inappropriate. She observed Guardsman Mitchell maintaining perfect discipline despite the verbal assault, and her respect for the young soldier's professionalism only intensified her displeasure with Marcus's conduct. "Commander Wellington." Sarah's voice cut through Marcus's tirade with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. Her tone was calm but carried an unmistakable edge that made Marcus stop mid-sentence and turn toward her. Marcus's eyes fell upon Sarah's uniform, noting her rank insignia and the various decorations adorning her chest. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. He assumed that any officer involved in palace duties must be similar to the guards he had been criticizing, more ceremony than substance. Finally, "Someone with actual authority," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've been trying to address the completely unacceptable behavior of this guardsman who has shown nothing but disrespect toward a senior naval officer. I demand immediate disciplinary action." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were carefully assessing every aspect of the situation. She noticed the crowd of tourists, their phones capturing every moment, and the obvious distress that Marcus's behavior was causing among the onlookers. More importantly, she recognized the signs of an officer who had lost control of both his temper and his judgment. "I see," Sarah replied evenly. "And what specific actions has Guardsman Mitchell taken that you consider disrespectful, Commander?" Over the round, Marcus launched into a detailed account of his perceived grievances, describing the guard's silence as insubordination and his immobility as deliberate disrespect. As he spoke, his voice grew louder and more agitated, apparently believing that passion would strengthen his arguments. He failed to notice Sarah's increasingly concerned expression, or the way she occasionally glanced at the security cameras positioned around the area. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "this kind of behavior reflects poorly on the entire military establishment. How can we expect public respect when our own personnel conduct themselves in such an unprofessional manner? I've served this country for 15 years, and I've never encountered such blatant insubordination." Sarah listened patiently to Marcus's complaints, allowing him to thoroughly document his own misconduct through his words and actions. She understood that rushing to judgment or escalating the confrontation would serve no productive purpose. Instead, she let Marcus reveal the full extent of his character while she gathered the information she would need for her report. "Commander, I appreciate your concerns," Sarah said diplomatically. "However, I should point out that Guardsman Mitchell has been following his orders precisely as trained. Royal Guards are instructed to maintain their position and composure, regardless of external provocation. His behavior has been entirely appropriate and professional." Marcus's face reddened at what he perceived as contradictory support for the Guard's actions. "Appropriate? Professional? I am a senior officer in Her Majesty's Royal Navy, and when I address a subordinate, I expect acknowledgement and respect. This is basic military courtesy that apparently isn't being taught to these ceremonial soldiers." "I understand your perspective," Sarah replied carefully. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter more privately. Would you be willing to accompany me to my office, where we can address your concerns through proper channels?" The suggestion was both reasonable and appropriate, offering Marcus an opportunity to gracefully extract himself from the increasingly public spectacle he had created. However, his wounded pride and inflated ego prevented him from recognizing the lifeline being offered. Instead, he interpreted Sarah's diplomatic approach as weakness and validation of his position. "There's nothing to discuss privately," Marcus declared loudly, ensuring that his words carried to the assembled tourists. "This is a matter of military discipline and proper respect for authority. I want this guardsman's conduct officially documented, and I want assurance that appropriate corrective action will be taken immediately." Sarah's patience was wearing thin, but her professional training kept her response measured and controlled. She had dealt with difficult personalities throughout her military career, but Marcus's combination of arrogance and public misconduct was testing even her considerable diplomatic skills. "Very well, Commander," Sarah said, her tone becoming noticeably cooler. "I want to ensure I have all the facts correct for my report. You approached Guardsman Mitchell this morning, and when he maintained his assigned position as required by standing orders, you interpreted this as personal disrespect toward your rank and service?" Marcus nodded emphatically, apparently pleased that someone was finally taking notes for what he assumed would be disciplinary action against the guard. "Exactly. And I want it clearly documented that his behavior was witnessed by dozens of tourists who are now questioning the professionalism of our military personnel." "I see," Sarah replied, making mental notes that Marcus couldn't begin to imagine. "And during this interaction, what specific words did you use to address Guardsman Mitchell?" The question caught Marcus slightly off guard, but his confidence in his own righteousness prevented him from recognizing the trap being set. "I addressed him respectfully initially, calling him toy soldier as a term of endearment, and when he failed to respond appropriately, I was forced to be more direct about the respect due to superior officers." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly at Marcus's casual admission to using derogatory language, followed by his characterization of such language as respectful or endearing. She realized that Marcus was either completely oblivious to how his behavior appeared to others, or he genuinely believed that his rank entitled him to treat subordinates with contempt. "And when you say you were more direct, could you elaborate on the specific nature of that directness?" Sarah continued her questioning with the methodical precision of someone building a comprehensive record. Marcus proceeded to repeat many of his earlier statements, apparently believing that restating his position would strengthen his case. He described his criticisms of the guard's training, his comparisons between ceremonial duty and real military service, and his demands for immediate recognition of his authority and achievements. With each word, Marcus was unknowingly providing Sarah with detailed documentation of conduct that violated numerous military regulations regarding the treatment of subordinate personnel, public behavior, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His assumption that Sarah shared his perspective blinded him to the reality that she was systematically cataloging his misconduct. "I appreciate your thoroughness, Commander," Sarah said diplomatically. "Now, I need to verify a few details with Guardsman Mitchell before we proceed. Guardsman, did you at any point during this interaction fail to follow your standing orders or engage in any behavior that could be considered inappropriate or insubordinate?" "No, ma'am," Guardsman Mitchell replied crisply, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. His voice was clear and professional, demonstrating none of the agitation or disrespect that Marcus had described. "And have you been properly trained on the protocols for interacting with visiting officers and dignitaries?" Sarah continued. "Yes, ma'am. We are instructed to maintain our position and bearing regardless of external circumstances, to speak only when directly addressed by authorized personnel, and to follow the chain of command for all official communications." Marcus's face showed increasing irritation as he realized that the questioning was not proceeding as he had anticipated. "This is ridiculous," he interjected. "Of course he's going to claim he followed orders. The question is whether those orders are appropriate for dealing with senior officers who deserve proper respect." Sarah turned back to Marcus with an expression that had grown noticeably less diplomatic. "Commander, I want to ensure I understand your position completely. Are you suggesting that Royal Guards should abandon their assigned duties and protocols when approached by officers from other services?" "I'm suggesting that basic military courtesy should take precedence over ceremonial nonsense," Marcus replied hotly. "When a senior officer addresses a subordinate, That subordinate should respond appropriately, regardless of whatever theatrical role he's playing for tourists. The crowd had grown larger during the extended confrontation, and several tourists were expressing their disapproval of Marcus's behavior through their conversations and facial expressions. Some were posting their videos to social media in real time, adding commentary that was decidedly unfavorable to the naval commander. Sarah noticed the crowd's reaction and realized that the situation had progressed beyond the point where it could be quietly resolved. Marcus's public behavior had created a diplomatic and public relations problem that would require formal documentation and official response. "Commander Wellington," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone of formal authority, "I am officially advising you that your conduct this morning has been inappropriate and potentially in violation of several military regulations. I strongly recommend that you accept my offer to discuss this matter privately before any further escalation occurs." Marcus's response revealed the full extent of his arrogance and poor judgment. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of Sarah's warning, he interpreted it as an attempt to protect the guard from justified criticism. His next words would prove to be the final mistake in a morning full of catastrophic decisions. "I find it interesting that you're more concerned with protecting a ceremonial soldier than supporting a distinguished naval officer," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled crowd. "Perhaps this explains why palace security has become such a joke that tourists can waltz right up to the gates without proper screening." The insult to palace security and Sarah's professional competence was the final straw. Marcus had just crossed a line from inappropriate behavior into direct insubordination and public criticism of royal security protocols. The consequences of his words would begin to unfold much faster than he could possibly anticipate. Sarah's expression hardened as Marcus's final insult echoed across the palace courtyard. The crowd of tourists had grown silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even those who had been entertained by the earlier confrontation now seemed uncomfortable with the escalating tension and obvious disrespect being displayed. "Commander Wellington," Sarah said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had reached the limits of diplomatic tolerance, "you have just publicly criticized royal security protocols and questioned the competence of Her Majesty's Guard. I am hereby placing you under immediate military detention pending formal investigation of your conduct." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His confident demeanor wavered for the first time, as the reality of the situation began to penetrate his arrogant assumptions. "You can't be serious," he stammered, looking around at the crowd as if seeking support for his position. "I'm here for an official ceremony. I'm expected by the Admiral himself. Security, please escort Commander Wellington to holding Area 3. Sarah spoke into her radio with calm professionalism. "Classification level. Urgent disciplinary matter. Senior officer involved. Notify Admiral Richardson's office immediately that Commander Wellington will not be attending this morning's ceremony due to conduct violations." Within moments, 2 plainclothes security officers appeared from different directions, their approach coordinated and efficient. These were not the ceremonial guards that Marcus had been mocking, but highly trained protection specialists whose primary job was dealing with serious security threats. Their presence made it clear that Sarah's authority was both real and immediately enforceable. Marcus's face went pale as he realized that his morning was taking a dramatically different turn than he had anticipated. "This is completely unnecessary," he protested, his voice rising with panic. "I was simply addressing inappropriate behavior by a subordinate. This is a massive overreaction to a minor disciplinary issue." "Rhyme. Sir, you need to come with us now," one of the security officers said firmly but politely. "Any resistance will result in additional charges being filed against you." The tourists watched in stunned silence as the man who had been aggressively berating the royal guard just minutes earlier was led away in disgrace. Their phones continued recording, capturing every moment of Marcus's humiliation for posterity. The videos that had started as amusing tourist footage were now documenting the complete destruction of a military officer's career. As Marcus was escorted into the palace, Sarah turned to Guardsman Mitchell with a slight smile. "Excellent discipline, Guardsman. Your conduct today exemplified everything we expect from the Queen's Guard. I'll be noting your professionalism in my report." "Thank you, ma'am," Mitchell replied, maintaining his perfect posture despite the extraordinary circumstances he had just endured. Sarah then addressed the crowd of tourists. her diplomatic skills now focused on damage control. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the unfortunate incident you witnessed this morning. Please be assured that the behavior you observed does not represent the values or standards of Her Majesty's Armed Forces." Meanwhile, inside the palace, events were unfolding at a pace that would have shocked Marcus had he been aware of them. Sarah's radio communication had triggered a series of immediate responses throughout the military hierarchy. Admiral Richardson, who had been preparing to present Marcus with his commendation, was now reviewing preliminary reports of the incident with growing disbelief and anger. The Admiral's secretary was already on the phone with the Naval Personnel Command, requesting Marcus's complete service record and any previous disciplinary actions. Within minutes, a pattern began to emerge of an officer whose arrogance and poor judgment had been overlooked due to his technical competence and family connections. In Holding Area 3, Marcus sat alone, still trying to process how rapidly his situation had deteriorated. He had arrived at the palace expecting recognition and honor, only to find himself facing the possibility of court-martial and disgrace. His phone had been confiscated as part of standard detention procedures, preventing him from contacting his influential friends or family members who might have been able to intervene on his behalf. The security footage from the morning's incident was already being reviewed by multiple officials. The cameras had captured every word, every gesture, and every moment of Marcus's inappropriate behavior. More damaging still were the dozens of tourist videos that were rapidly spreading across social media platforms, creating a public relations nightmare that extended far beyond military circles. Admiral Richardson arrived at the palace an hour later, his face grim with the knowledge of what he would find. He had served with Marcus's father years earlier, and had been instrumental in advancing Marcus's career, based partly on family loyalty and partly on Marcus's undeniable technical skills. Now he was faced with evidence that his protege had become everything he despised in military leadership. Sarah presented her preliminary report with professional efficiency, documenting not only Marcus's behavior but also the broader implications for military discipline and public perception. The video evidence left no room for doubt about what had transpired, and the tourist recordings provided additional perspectives that confirmed the severity of the incident. "I've reviewed the footage," Admiral Richardson said grimly after studying the evidence. "This is not just a matter of poor judgment. This is conduct that undermines the integrity of the entire service. Commander Wellington's behavior was disgraceful and completely contrary to every principle we expect from our officers." The Admiral's disappointment was particularly acute because he had personally recommended Marcus for the morning's commendation. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone involved. An officer being honored for leadership had demonstrated the complete absence of the qualities that true leadership required. Within 2 hours of the initial incident, Marcus's security clearance was under formal review by the Defense Vetting Agency. His access to classified materials and sensitive information was immediately suspended, pending the outcome of the investigation. For a naval officer, the loss of security clearance was often a career-ending event, particularly when it resulted from conduct violations rather than administrative issues. The speed with which these consequences unfolded reflected both the seriousness with which military authorities viewed Marcus's conduct and the efficiency of modern military administration systems. What Marcus had assumed would be a minor complaint against a guardsman had triggered a comprehensive review of his own fitness for continued service. The tourist videos had meanwhile reached mainstream media outlets, with news programs featuring the incident as an example of inappropriate military behavior and the importance of accountability at all levels of service. Marcus's name was being broadcast across the country in connection with conduct that brought shame to the uniform he wore. By late afternoon, Marcus was released from detention but remained under strict orders not to leave London pending the formal investigation. His temporary quarters were basic military accommodations rather than the luxury hotel where he had spent the previous night. The contrast served as a stark reminder of how dramatically his circumstances had changed in just a few hours. The investigation that followed was thorough and swift. Military justice systems are designed to handle cases involving conduct unbecoming an officer with efficiency that civilian courts might envy. Marcus's previous incidents of arrogance and inappropriate behavior, previously overlooked or minimized, were now being examined as part of a pattern of conduct incompatible with military service. Character witnesses who had once protected Marcus now found themselves questioned about their own judgment in supporting him. His influential connections discovered that their reputations could be damaged by continued association with someone whose behavior had become a public embarrassment to the service. The formal charges filed against Marcus included conduct unbecoming an officer, public disrespect toward military personnel, violation of protocols regarding interaction with royal security forces, and bringing discredit upon the Royal Navy. Each charge carried serious potential consequences, including dismissal from service and loss of pension benefits. Marcus's attempts to mount a defense were hampered by the overwhelming evidence against him and his own admissions during the incident. His claim that he had been treated unfairly was undermined by video evidence showing his aggressive and inappropriate behavior toward a guardsman who had conducted himself with exemplary discipline throughout the encounter. The court-martial proceedings were swift and decisive. The military justice system had little tolerance for officers whose conduct violated the fundamental principles of military service, particularly when such behavior occurred in public view and brought negative attention to the armed forces. The final judgment was comprehensive and devastating. Marcus was dismissed from service with loss of rank and forfeiture of pension benefits. His 15 years of service were overshadowed by 7 minutes of arrogance and poor judgment that revealed his true character. The commendation he had come to receive was instead replaced with a permanent mark of disgrace that would follow him for the rest of his life. Guardsman Mitchell, meanwhile, received recognition for his exemplary conduct under pressure. His ability to maintain discipline and professionalism in the face of aggressive provocation became a training example for future royal guards, demonstrating the importance of proper conduct regardless of circumstances. The incident served as a powerful reminder throughout the military that rank and achievement do not excuse inappropriate behavior, and that true military virtue is measured not by one's actions when everything goes well, but by one's conduct when faced with challenge and pressure. Marcus had failed that test completely, while a young guardsman had passed it with distinction. In the end, 7 minutes of arrogance had destroyed a career that had taken 15 years to build, proving that character and judgment are more important than technical skill or influential connections in determining who deserves to wear the uniform and serve their country with honor.